Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. I am Professor Jill Castle, the Marshal of the George Washington University, and I am joined this morning by Victory Sanchez, a senior in the Elliott School at GW, and together, on behalf of the students and faculty at the George Washington University, we would like to welcome all of you to this very special event. Now, it is my very great pleasure and honor to present His Excellency Leonel Fernandez Reina, the President of the Dominican Republic, escorted by Dr. Stephen Knapp, the President of the George Washington University. We cross to them.
Esteemed members of the Presidential Delegation for the Dominican Republic, university trustees, faculty, students, alumni, and staff, it is my distinct honor today to welcome His Excellency Leonel Fernandez, President of the Dominican Republic, to the George Washington University. In January 2009, I had the pleasure of visiting the Dominican Republic as a guest of our alumna and university trustee, Maria Matilda Pastoriza de Bonetti. Traveling with our delegation on that occasion was the former United States Ambassador to the Dominican Republic and former Chairman of the George Washington University Board of Trustees, Charles Manat, and I'm delighted to note that Ambassador Manat and his wife Kathy are with us here this morning. During my visit, I was deeply honored by the opportunity to meet President Fernandez in his office to discuss areas of potential collaboration between the George Washington University and institutions in the Dominican Republic. Since then, the partnership between George Washington and Dominican institutions has continued to develop. Last year, our Graduate School of Political Management established a partnership with the Fundación Global de Democracia y Desarrollo, also known as FUNGLODE, to offer seminars in political campaign management in Santo Domingo. Members of our business school faculty are working with the Dominican Sustainable Tourism Alliance to enhance the competitiveness of tourism in the Dominican Republic. And our School of Medicine and Health Sciences, through its partnership with the Global Network for Neglected and Tropical Diseases Control, is working closely with the Dominican public health officials to advance the surveillance and treatment of two of the most common neglected tropical diseases in the Caribbean region. In view of this growing relationship across many different fronts, we are grateful for President Fernandez's generous offer to address our university community this morning. President Fernandez is no stranger to university campuses. Prior to his entry into politics, he was a distinguished academic. After graduating from high school in New York City, he returned to his native country to enroll in the Faculty of Law of the Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo, where he received a doctoral degree and graduated at the top of his class. He subsequently became a professor at the university and taught multiple subjects. In 1973, while on the university faculty, he joined the Dominican Liberation Party, eventually rising to leadership positions in the party's central and political committees. Elected to his country's highest office in 1996, and now serving in his third term, he has focused in the international arena on improving hemispheric relations and domestically on economic growth, investments in infrastructure, and the improvement of healthcare. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the President of the Dominican Republic, His Excellency Leonel Fernandez.
Well, thank you so much, President Knapp, for your kind and warm introduction here this morning. And I also want to thank you for the kind invitation to come and speak here today, as well as to Ambassador Manat, who, while as chairman of the board here at this university, also had sent me a letter inviting me to come here today. And I do remember very well when you were in the Dominican Republic over a year and a half ago, your interest in establishing a working relationship with different ministries in the Dominican Republic with this prestigious university in the areas which you have just indicated, with the School of Political Management, with the Ministry of Healthcare, through the neglected tropical diseases, and through sustainable tourism. And I think this is very helpful for the Dominican Republic, in terms of having a modern outlook in these different areas and having a collaborating partnership with this institution. So thank you very much for your openness and your willingness to collaborate with us in the Dominican Republic. And of course, today I will be speaking about current situation in Latin America, about the political situation, about the impact of the global economic crisis, and about U.S.-Latin American relationship. And if you allow me, I would like to start a little bit talking about something that is going on in Latin America since the past 2 years, which is the celebration of our bicentennial. The bicentennial, which marks the independence movement in all Latin America, the rupture with the European colonial powers that began in 1808 when Napoleon occupied the Iberian Peninsula, and this had an influence in all Latin America, creating civic juntas that eventually became the origins of the independence movements in all of our countries. So since 2008, we have been celebrating, and we are celebrating up to this date, the bicentennial of our independence. But I think that by beginning the celebration in 2008, we have been a little bit unfair with a neighboring country, with Haiti. Because Haiti was the first Latin American country that began its independence not in 1808, but in 1804, the second country in the hemisphere after the U.S. 13 colonies. So there has been some sort of indifference and neglect about not taking into consideration that it was Haiti, the first country in Latin America, that really began an independent movement. Now, why has there been this sort of lack of remembrance on Haiti? I think is because when Haiti declared its independence, it also abolished slavery. The only country in Latin America that did both things at the same time. And because of the abolition of slavery, this created an isolationism problem for Haiti around the hemisphere. It was not until way after the Civil War here in the United States that Haiti was recognized diplomatically. I remembered yesterday to President Obama in our conversation that the first U.S. ambassador appointed to Haiti was Frederick Douglass, who was also chargé d'affaires in the Dominican Republic. So this makes a very particular connection between our countries and the Afro-American community here in the United States. And of course, now we have this situation in Haiti, which was already a tragedy before the earthquake, because by abolishing slavery, being isolated, Haiti became impoverished ever since. And of course, internal problems, dictatorships, a lot of cruelty, brutality, a lack of sustained economic strategy for development, all this come together made Haiti already the most poor country in Latin America before the earthquake on January the 12th. The earthquake has only aggravated the situation in Haiti. It has only made things worse. And yesterday, we had already 6 months after the earthquake. And what is being discussed now is about the recovery process. How is it going in Haiti? And of course, we all know that the recovery process is still very slow. It has not really created an impact on the Haitian population. And it is due to various reasons. First of all, because the government in Haiti has been overwhelmed by the impact of this tragedy. Beginning with the national palace in Haiti, it collapsed. Many buildings belonging to different ministries also collapsed. Government officials died. Government families also died in this tragedy, and friends. So they were originally overwhelmed by what took place. So they were in a state of confusion. There were no institutional working channels to deal with at the beginning of this tragedy. It is only in the last few weeks that an institution has been created, the Interim Commission for the Recovery of Haiti. And I think that through this commission, which is a bipartisan commission between members of the different parties in Haiti, but also from international donors, and this commission is headed by President Clinton and the Prime Minister of Haiti, Jean-Max Berif. We have a lot of hope that through the Commission, there will be an institutional channel to push forward the recovery process in Haiti. Another reason why we have not seen yet any real progress in the recovery of Haiti is because the international community has not fully delivered on its pledges. Only about 10% of what has been committed has already been delivered to Haiti. And much of that, not to the Haitian government, but specifically through NGOs or civil society organizations, which creates an image problem for the Haitian government because the people hold the government accountable and the government has not had enough resources to really respond to people's needs. But I think now with the Commission already in place, with the summit we recently held in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, to follow up on the UN donors meeting held in March in New York, there was a reiteration of the commitment by different countries that they will come through with their pledges in terms of the recovery for Haiti. What we do think is that a full recovery for Haiti will take at least 10 years to really have an impact. It is not going back to where Haiti was before the earthquake. It is really creating a more vibrant economy, a more modernized nation, a nation integrated into the world economy, a population better educated, having access to healthcare, water supply, electricity. All this takes time. So we will go through stages. A first stage would be to have some sort of working space, but looking into long-term solutions, at least we'll have to look at 10 years, and with an investment that will also be at least 10 billion US dollars. So this is the situation in Haiti today. And of course, as I said before, we feel hopeful that the situation will evolve positively. Now, I was talking about the bicentennial in Latin America. And when we talk about bicentennial, we mean independence, we mean the creation of nation states in Latin America. And when these nation states were created, our main goal was to establish democracy. Everywhere in Latin America, the ideal of democracy was there. Having representative governments elected by the people that will be held accountable, the rule of law. Of course, during the 19th century, this never took place in Latin America. And there are many theories from historians and sociologists and political science why this never took place in Latin America. But essentially, I would say it is because there is a correlation between economics and politics. And democracy in the Western Hemisphere has been some sort of linkage between development of capitalism and democratic institutions. And during the 19th century, Latin American economies were not really capitalist economies. They were pre-capitalists. And wealth depended basically on land ownership. So instead of having a national bourgeoisie in the 19th century, we had oligarchies that depended basically on control of the land. And most of our economy depended on primary agricultural or mineral exports. In our case, in the Dominican Republic, it was sugar, it was coffee, it was tobacco, it was cocoa, and this lasted even well into the 20th century. So because we had weak economies, because we didn't have a capitalist development economies, also this reflected politically in having weak democracies. Democracy was the exception in Latin America in the 19th century. We had dictatorships everywhere. We call the caudillos, caudillos who were the leaders, local leaders in different places, the strongmen, dictatorships. And this up until, I would say, the Mexican Revolution in 1910. It is after the Mexican Revolution that we can speak about a first wave of democracy in Latin America. Professor Samuel Huntington from Harvard University some years ago wrote a book about the third wave of democracy. But he was speaking about a universal process of different waves of democracy. If we compare this to what has taken place historically in Latin America, we can also speak about three waves of democracy in Latin America. And I would say the first wave began with the Mexican Revolution in 1910, which we celebrate the first centennial this year. 2010, the first centennial of the Mexican Revolution. But this wave only lasted around 20 years. from 1910 until 1930, when the continent was impacted by the Great Depression. The Great Depression had an enormous influence in the political outcome of Latin America. 13 governments were overthrown by military coup d'etat between 1930 and 1939. So the influence politically that the Great Depression had is that it created an atmosphere for dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. This is how, for example, in our country, Rafael Leonidas Trujillo came into power. What made it possible was the economic impact of the Great Depression, but also the Somozas in Nicaragua are a direct result of the Great Depression in the 1930s. And all the dictatorships in Central America were a direct result of the Great Depression. The Great Depression in the 1930s influenced trade. There was a decrease in exports, which of course meant less revenues for the government, and there was social unrest. And with all this came political upheaval, and then we had all these dictators around in Latin America. So this is the result of a major economic event, a global economic event of the times, the Great Depression, and the political impact it had in the continent. From there, we'll move on into a second wave of democracy that came after the Second World War. I would say from 1945 until 1963, when a democratic government in the Dominican Republic, headed by Juan Bosch, who was a leader in exile against Trujillo, was elected in 1963 and overthrown by a coup d'etat in 1963, only after 7 months in office. I think this ended a trend in Latin America where we had democratic governments elected in Venezuela, in Colombia, in Brazil, and also in some of the countries in the Caribbean region. But during the 60s, a coup d'etat in Brazil against João Goulart, this coup d'etat against Bosch, Villeda Morales in Honduras are just showcases of a new wave of coup, military coup, that took place between the 50s and the 60s. And because there was a lack of democratic political stability in Latin America, the Cuban Revolution took place in 1959. Some people wonder, why did the Cuban Revolution really take place? And you have to, the only answer to that is when you put it in a historical context, within the context of the hemisphere and within the context of specific Cuban history. We must remember that Cuba was the last country to achieve independence in Latin America in 1902, with the participation of the US in the Hispanic-Cuban-American War back in 1898. So, and after achieving its independence in 1902, Cuba might have had, let's say, 3 or 4 democratic governments during the whole 20th century. The last democratic government was from 1948 to 1952, a government of a person really nobody remembers anymore. Carlos Prío Socarrás was the last democratically elected president in Cuba. And his term was supposed to end in 1952. Elections were scheduled to take place in Cuba during that year. And it is interesting to remember that a young lawyer from the province of Havana, Fidel Castro, was aspiring candidate to a seat in the Chamber of Deputies for Havana. So Fidel Castro was running to become a member of the Chamber of Deputies for the 1952 parliamentary and presidential elections. And then all of a sudden, there was a coup d'etat, this time headed by Fulgencio Batista. And when Fulgencio Batista led this coup d'etat, everything changed in modern Cuban history, because that encouraged the idea of a revolution. That began with the assault on the Cuartel Moncada a year later, 1953, and the celebration of the centennial of the birth of José Martí, who was born in 1853 and is the iconic historical figure of Cuba. Of course, this assault on the Moncada barricadas, how do you say that, barracks, the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba, it failed. but it created the possibility of an insurgency that began in 1959. I would say 57 and ended in 1959 with the victory of the Cuban Revolution. Now, the Cuban Revolution had an enormous influence in all of Latin America. When I began participating in politics in the Dominican Republic, as part of a Latin American youth movement, we were all highly influenced by the Cuban Revolution. Why was that? Because we saw that democratic access to power was blockaded. There was no democratic access to power. Power was in the hands of the military, of the corrupted, of those that had no interest in the well-being of the nation. So everywhere around the world, progressive movements, people that were committed to the best interests of their people, were making revolutions. So democracy was a discredited word back in the 1960s and the 1970s. Everyone who wanted to participate actively in a political movement would be part of a revolutionary movement. We wanted to radically transform our nations, and the Cuban Revolution was a paradigm for that. But beginning in the Dominican Republic in 1978, for the first time in Latin American history, we will have a sustained, stable, democratic political order. The third wave of democracy was beginning to take place after 1978, during the whole 80s and up to this moment in Latin America. The third wave of democracy began in the Dominican Republic, and it has stayed there for the last 31, 32 years. Now, why the Dominican Republic? Because after Juan Bosch was overthrown, as I said before, in 1963, there was a civic, military, political uprising in the Dominican Republic in 1965. It was an uprising intended to bring back Juan Bosch into power and to restore constitutional order in the Dominican Republic. But we were within the Cold War. You must remember we were within the Cold War. 1965, Dominican Republic is very close to Cuba. So there was the idea of preventing a second Cuba in the Caribbean. And President Johnson mistakenly ordered a military occupation of the Dominican Republic in 1965. So after that, 12 years in power, President Joaquin Balaguer, under very difficult circumstances. 1978, President Carter had come into office in 1976. He promoted respect for human rights all over the world and a democratic opening for Latin America. And perhaps most people do not realize how influential and how powerful this was. That President Carter, a US president, indicated that he would not recognize any government that was not legitimate, that was not the expression of the will of the people. And so free and fair elections took place in the Dominican Republic in 1978, and there was a change of government. A democratically elected government by the people took office in 1978. And then it repeated itself in Ecuador in 1979, and from there on to all the countries in Latin America in the 1980s, with the exception of Cuba. So we have this third wave of democracy in Latin America, something new, something that never had happened before. Never have we had a historical cycle of over 30 years of sustained political stability under democratic regimes. Never. It's something brand new in Latin American history. That is why we become concerned and we worried when a coup d'etat takes place, and why we condemned so harshly the coup d'etat that took place in Honduras, because it sent a wrong signal that democracy could be reversed in Latin America. And we say that so much blood has been shed in the name of democracy, of freedom, that we cannot accept a reversal in terms of democracy and good governance in Latin America. And this is why the coup in Honduras was so harshly condemned. But the circumstances under which a democratic transition was made in Latin America are very interesting to explore. Traditionally, you have democratic governments when there has been economic prosperity. Economic prosperity necessarily brings a democratic opening, but it occurred otherwise in Latin America. Democracy took place because there was, first of all, a crisis in terms of human rights, and aggravated because of a deep economic crisis. So the military were unable to continue managing the situation in our Latin American countries. It was a combination of these two factors, economic crisis and political crisis, which exercised pressure over the military to hand over government to the civil society, to the political parties. And then this has had also an influence in the perception that people will have on democracy. Because democratically elected governments, when they began their exercise in office, were under very harsh, very difficult economic conditions. It is the lost decade, the 1980s. So we had a transition to democracy, but also a lost decade in terms of economics. And that made it difficult for democratically elected governments because people began losing faith in the ability of democracy to deliver on people's needs. So many would say, look, I was better off during the dictatorship because even though I didn't have freedom, at least I have food on the table. Now, here we have a democracy that is unable to deliver on our people's needs. So there's this contradiction on which was better. Now, a democracy that is unable to supply basic needs, to supply people's basic needs, or dictatorships that suppress freedom, but at least during many years were able to guarantee basic foodstuff. So this was the problem. And because of that, we had hyperinflation, high unemployment rates. Then there was a new economic policy philosophy, that was designed at the beginning of the 1990s, which is the Washington Consensus, which has been so highly criticized in many places in Latin America. And I would like to be fair enough and strike a balance about really what the Washington Consensus has meant for Latin America. At the time of its drafting, there was a deep economic crisis in Latin America. There were huge fiscal deficits. There was macroeconomic instability. There was high unemployment, as I said before, hyperinflation. And the Washington Consensus was able to correct that. After the application of these policy measures, we were able to come back to macroeconomic stability, economic growth, and the elimination of hyperinflation. So I would say that the main objectives of the Washington Consensus were achieved. Now, there was something that was lacking in the Washington Consensus that we learned afterwards. It was social issues. The Washington Consensus did not address social issues. And what is at stake now for the future of democracies in Latin America is not the strengthening of political institutions, it's our capacity to address issues such as poverty, social inequality, education, access to health care, and anti-poverty programs. It is having access to water supply, reliable electric power systems. It is the possibility of people mobilizing worldwide and taking advantage of the benefits of globalization. This is our agenda nowadays in Latin America. And of course, under the circumstances that we have not been able to solve these basic problems, there is an ideological dispute between two different models. Should our democracies be more market-oriented democracies, or should there be a more active participation of the state in terms of guaranteeing a better redistribution of wealth? And this has been the historical, traditional debate on Latin American politics. And we have experienced both. There has been a state-centric development theory over many years that was successful for some time and later faded away. We have gone through cycles. After the Second World War, a developmentalist theory carried out by CEPAL, the school of thought under the auspices of the United Nations for Latin America, economic theories applied to Latin America. It was a state-centric theory of development, and it worked well from 1945 until the 60s. From there on then, a conservative theory of more market-oriented economy have been in place, also with some success, also with some failure. So we know now, the lesson that has been learned is that you cannot work with either extreme, neither a state-centric policy or a market fundamentalism. in Latin America, in the 21st century, we have to go beyond neoliberalism, and we have to go beyond populism. We have to find a new formula that will combine state and market, that can strike a balance between state and market. Market as a source of allocation for resources, the state as the central piece for guaranteeing a fair and just distribution of wealth. If we are able to make a combination of these two elements that cannot work apart, I think Latin America will be able to stand beyond its ideological, philosophical, economic policy disputes between state and the markets. This is where we stand today. And of course, finally, I would say this, just two things. The current global financial crisis, how it has impacted Latin America. Interesting enough, we have not had a financial crisis in Latin America. There is a global financial crisis, but no financial crisis in Latin America. This is something quite unique. No financial crisis in Latin America. Not one bank has failed in Latin America. But this crisis did not originate in Latin America. For the first time, we have a crisis of this magnitude that did not originate in Latin America. The impact has been basically on trade, as it happened back in the 30s. There has been a decrease in exports and a decrease in imports. And because of that, there has been a loss of revenues for governments. So this has translated into a fiscal deficit that we have been able to finance by increasing our debt. So this is the current situation. Now, related to this mounting public deficit, which is taking place in the US, is taking place in every European country, and of course in every Latin American country, the problem is, how are we going to guarantee the sustainability of economic growth while at the same time dealing with the fiscal deficit, dealing with the debt? And there are now two schools of thought. In Europe, and I think is wrong, what they're trying to do is apply austerity measures, cut spending at this time. I think it is untimely. We still have a very slow, weak economic growth. If you cut spending at this moment, you might provoke deflation. I think what the Obama administration is trying to do is the correct thing, is the correct path. We are still in a very slow, weak recovery. You cannot cut spending. You have to make the economy grow. Later on, with the creation of new wealth, we deal with the deficit and we deal with the debt. But in the meantime, we have to bring down unemployment. We have to reboost the housing market. We have to make the economy strong again. And then when the economy is strong, we deal with the fiscal deficit and we deal with the debt and with other matters that preoccupy the financial markets. Because there's a contradiction in all this. Why have governments increased their debts? Because they bailed out the banks. It is because they bailed out the banks with taxpayers' money. And now the banks are saying through the financial markets, you must reduce your debt because otherwise you get into default. So now the ones that are going to go bankrupt according to the financial markets will be the governments. Now, of course, if the government go bankrupt, the whole world will collapse. There's no way this can happen. No? So this is the process we're going through now in Latin America. What is going to be done in the near future? Austerity measures or continue spending in an anti-cyclical policy to guarantee economic growth, creation of new wealth, and decrease in unemployment rate. And this brings us then to the last comment I'd like to make about the relevance of US-Latin American relations. Does Latin America really matter to the US? I think I'm a living testimony that it does matter. Yesterday I had a meeting with President Obama. So if a president from a small country in Latin America can catch the attention of the US president, I think there is an expression that Latin America really does matter to the United States. President Obama has a lot on the table. He has to think about Afghanistan. He has to think about Iraq, about the global economic crisis, about the next elections here in November. So there's a lot to be thought about to take some time and speak to a president from the Dominican Republic. But yes, President Obama and the US administration understands that Latin America does matter. And it matters beyond its culture, beyond its music. And I know that when President Knapp was in Santo Domingo, he took them some time to dance merengue. I learned about that. Huh? So culture really does matter. It is important. But beyond culture, beyond music, there is also business. Latin America represents a trade relationship with the US of nearly $250 billion yearly. That is much more than the European Union, that is much more than China. So in terms of trade, Latin America matters to the US. Latin America matters because, also from the dark side, because all the drugs, all the illicit trafficking of drugs that comes into the US comes from the Andean countries, comes from the Caribbean nations. So this also matters for the United States. And if we have any doubt, let me say that if there's any doubts that Latin America matters in the US, we have now 41 million Latinos living in the United States. That's 15% of all the people living here in this country. And finally, the Dominican Republic has become the most important country exporting Major League Baseball players to the United States. Right? And with that, I hope that Albino Jimenez wins for the National League in the All-Star game. Thank you so much.
President Fernandez, thank you so much for those wonderful remarks. I must say, I thank you on behalf of the university, but I thank you also as a fellow professor. I learned so much about history and economics and politics, and I learned that my president danced the merengue. Yes. I did not know this. I must follow up. Now, President Fernandez has kindly agreed to take questions from audience members. So those who are interested in asking questions, would you please line up here in the center aisle? And here is our first question.
Hello, thank you again for coming and speaking with us. My name is Valentina Restrepo. I am from Madrid, Spain. I was wondering...
My congratulations.
Thank you very much. We're very excited. Thank you. You mentioned that, yes, in fact, Latin America is important to the United States, and I was wondering, after your talks with President Obama, what you think Latin America needs from the United States outside of their relationship, their trade relationship, what it is politically that the U.S. can do for Latin America and what they need.
At this moment, I think the most pressing issue has to do with security. Drug trafficking, violence, transnational crime has become a priority through all the region. You can look at Mexico, what's taking place with the drug cartels there, Central America, the Caribbean, us in the Dominican Republic, where it used to be just a springboard for drug trafficking in the region. Now, part of that drug has stayed in the Dominican Republic, creating a market we never had before. And young people from low-income families have become addicted. And this has created a wave of violence related to drug trafficking and crime we never had in the Dominican Republic, but it's taking place everywhere. And so I think this can be a major issue for national security in the US, not only because of drugs, but because we might have failed states in the region due to transnational crime. And after that, with failed states, you can have a target for terrorism. So it is important for the US to understand that there are two war fronts at this moment. You have a war front against terrorism, and you need a war front against drug trafficking in the region. So this is a priority. Of course, there are many other issues. I would say energy. 30% of the energy that is consumed by the US comes from Latin America. We need to go beyond oil. I think Brazil has indicated the way through the production of sugarcane ethanol. Dominican Republic can follow on that path. We have sugar mills in the Dominican Republic. We have a history of sugarcane production. I think we can also produce ethanol out of sugarcane, renewables, wind energy, solar energy. I think it's also some issues on the bilateral agenda between the US and all Latin America.
Thank you for your enlightening remarks, Mr. President. My name is Rodney Lopez. I am a Dominican. I work with Merck & Company. I am a Director of Trade and Policy for Latin America as a whole. I wonder, Mr. President, what the role of the private sector is at this juncture where we are historically. Is there a constructive role for the private sector? And if so, Does innovation play a role too in as we approach the future and try to come out of this economic downturn?
I think the private sector plays a key role in a strategic development in our region, and each time a more active and dynamic role. The challenge we have as nations is coming out with a strategy for competitiveness, which involves the public sector and the private sector. There must be a partnership there. Now, the public sector should work to create incentives for the private sector to come in with implementation of development policies, which will be beneficial to the private sector, but should be for the well-being of the whole population. Now, talking about a strategy for competitiveness, what I mean is that our vision for development needs to take into consideration the inevitability to integrate within the world markets, within the world economy. So it's not only satisfying the internal demand, but also integrating into the world economy. And in order to do that, there is a need for innovation, and there is a basic need for high-quality education, which is something that at some point we should talk about. If we don't have high-quality education, especially at our universities, that means the gap between the developed world and underdeveloped will even widen. At this moment, among the 200 universities ranked as world-class universities, we don't find one from Latin America. And that's to be of deep concern, because if we lose any edge in terms of educating our workforce or our elite, that means that we will not be able to compete in the 21st century. So we have to pay close attention also, science, technology, innovation, and the quality of higher education. Right?
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Yvonne Captain. I'm a professor here in Romance Languages, Latin American Film, and International Affairs. And I appreciate very much your discourse on the economic situation in Latin America, and following up with the idea of development and underdeveloped countries. I'm wondering, what advice would you give to your fellow presidents about South-South relations? And I'm thinking of particularly two models, both Brazil and on the other side of Venezuela.
Well, that's quite interesting, because I think it's also a new wave of relationship that we didn't have before. Before, it used to be North-South cooperation. Now we have a South-South dialogue. And we see very concrete things. For example, Brazil. Brazil have a development bank, El BNDES. And through BNDES, they fund Brazilian corporations to work on infrastructure in the different countries in Latin America. They do it in the Dominican Republic. They have been very helpful in building roads and bridges and aqueducts with Brazilian funding. In Venezuela, I always state this, one of the most progressive programs in terms of solidarity is Petrocaribe. President Chavez has been very helpful to us in the Dominican Republic, especially in terms of crisis, collaborating with oil in the Dominican Republic, not giving up oil. It's not a gift, but under conditions that will enable the Dominican Republic to overcome energy crisis at a determined juncture. So these solidarity programs from Brazil, from Venezuela, but also from Chile, different sorts of cooperation between all Latin American countries, I think is a new way of approaching, and also of integration. There is economic integration, there is energy integration, financial integration. As you know, we've always depended on the World Bank and IDB for funding most of our development programs. Nowadays, we have CAF, Corporación Andina de Fomento, which also funds many of our development projects. We have el Banco Centroamericano de Integración. We have the Caribbean Development Bank. So there are many different institutions that are part of a financial integration in the Caribbean, Central America, and Latin America that are making a difference and a breakaway from the past. All right?
Hello, President Fernandez. My name is Eddie Wharton. I'm a student at the George Washington University. I'm going to be a sophomore. My question for you is, I mean, you've mentioned things like they need to help Haiti, deficit, supporting a democracy, supporting a free economy. What can we in this room, ranging from students who have freedom of time and their fiery passions to the heads of prestigious institutions, what can we do to support it, whether that be through tourism, through financial support, political recognition? What can we do to help?
Well, that's a great question you're asking, you know, and I want to commend you on it. Because, I mean, as a young person as you are, the first thing is having that consciousness and trying to understand what takes place. And third, engagement, which is basically what your question is all about. It depends exactly on how you think you can contribute, how you can make some sort of contribution to a just cause around the world. But I think there are, let's say, values that we can share, of universal values that we can share. I think democracy is one. I think sovereignty lies in the people. Another has to do with respect for human rights and human dignity, no matter under which type of political regime you are. I think human rights and human dignity should always be respected. I think there is also a cause to fight against poverty, against inequality, against social exclusion, in a way. So there are many ways in which you can participate. You are in a process of learning, of understanding, but you are on the right path because you want to get engaged. You want to be part of history. Not only a student of history, but you want to be part of history. And I congratulate you on that.
Good morning, and thank you for speaking with us today. My name is Kevin Dool, and I'm a student at the Elliott School of International Affairs. Today you've mentioned the need for a partnership, or more of a partnership, between the private sector and government institutions. Would you project that within the next decade, the free market fundamentalism of Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek to go out of fashion within Latin America, or to continue to be strong within Latin America?
Well, I think that with the global financial crisis, this theory is already out of fashion. I think it has, someone has said that symbolically, what the global financial crisis has meant for capitalism is the fall of the Berlin Wall for socialism. So when Lehman Brothers collapsed, when it failed, it has the same symbolic meaning of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So there is a need to find new ways of thinking, new approaches to economics and politics. This has failed already. You cannot go through deregulation, recklessness in the management of such huge amount of financial resources, all these derivatives and out-of-the-counter transactions, future commodities markets. The way they have been handled is unsustainable. Just to look at it in one piece of fact, through derivatives, there has been a wealth of papers created of over 60 trillion US dollars, which is 8 times the GDP of the whole planet. And that's only on papers. So the world cannot go on doing these kinds of reckless, irresponsible behavior. And that was because of the von Hayek, Milton Friedman monetary policies of market fundamentalism. Now, I always try to be fair. They made some contribution to economic thinking and economic policy making. Of course they did. They were able to correct the excesses of Latin American populism and macroeconomic instability. Now, to say that market fundamentalism was the last answer to all economic problems, I think it was wrong. And the global financial crisis will put things in perspective, looking into the future, the need to come with a balancing of different economic theories.
In order to keep to our schedule, I was told that the president would take 5 questions, and I see questions 6, 7, 8, and 9 lined up in the aisle. Do we have time, or would you prefer to end with the 5 questions?
No, I think we do. I'll just be short on my answers.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Thank you, Mr. President, for coming to speak with us. My name is Kevin. I'm from Harvard University. I'm actually from New Jersey, so very close to New York City. Now, I was wondering, with your background growing up in the U.S., it seems like we have a strange situation where in New York City, we still have the poorest members of that city being the minorities, such as Latinos and African Americans. while at the same time we've also elected our first African American president. I was wondering what you thought of the future for minorities, especially Latinos, in the United States.
I think there is a great opportunity for Latinos in the US if they educate themselves. What made President Obama who he is now is because he is part of an intellectual elite. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for him to become president. And I should say that he had a lot of support in the Dominican Republic while he was running as a candidate. And the reason is because he looks Dominican. Right? So it all depends on education. The future of Latinos and minorities will depend on their capacity to educate themselves.
Saludos, señor presidente. I'm a Dominican.
I can see that.
I study at American University. You were a really important mediator between Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. And I want to know, what do you think about this idea of UNASUR? And if you think this will actually help the region to be more strong?
Well, you know, there have been different experiments in terms of political dialogue and integration in Latin America. UNASUR is perhaps one of the last. There's going to be another one, the Latin American Community for Democracy, I think it's going to be called. It will spring out of the Grupo de Rio. Out of this group will come up a new institution of Latin American scope to deal with political crisis and establish a permanent political dialogue. So UNASUR, I think, is a step forward in terms of integration, political integration, and that is a very good idea. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Leo Rancier. I'm from the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
I am a security management graduate student here at GW. My question is, you first mentioned the issue of drug trafficking and transnational crimes in Latin America. And I just want to ask, what's being done to fight corruption and to fight the lack of professionalism among security professionals in Latin America, especially the Dominican Republic?
That's also a very good question. First, in general, we are working with the World Bank, with IDB, and different organizations, the European Union, in drafting and implementing a transparent anti-corruption policy in the Dominican Republic. And I think some other countries are following on the same path. We are all preoccupied with corruption and lack of transparency in government dealings. Now, in terms of security, we have to focus on police forces. There is a need to overhaul our police forces. They have worked within a framework that no longer works. There needs to be some radical reform within police. But also we have to look at it in terms of international cooperation. Our forces by themselves cannot be able to tackle with the challenges of drug trafficking, crime, violence, and transnational crimes, or money laundering, I just mentioned a few. They need cooperation in terms of technology transfer, training, intelligence sharing. They need all this. And by technology, I mean surveillance equipments for maritime, air traffic, all these kinds of things that has to be on a collaborative basis with other countries, United States, but also with other countries around the region.
Good morning, Mr. President. Thank you so much for being here to speak with us today. My name is Sarah Radosevich. I'm a student at Duke University, and I'm interning with the State Department here for the summer. I'm wondering, now that we are at the 6-month anniversary of the earthquake in Haiti, if there are particular challenges that the Dominican Republic has faced as a result of the earthquake, and what the international community can do to assist.
Well, thank you. Many people thought at the beginning that with the earthquake, there will be a massive illegal migration into the Dominican Republic. It didn't happen. Fortunately, it didn't happen. What took place with many people injured that were treated in hospitals at the border, or in hospitals in Santo Domingo or in Santiago, some of the main cities. But this massive illegal migration never took place. People migrated up to the north of Haiti, to Cahuaitiano and Guanaminthe and other places, but not on the side of Santo Domingo. As I said before, the recovery process in Haiti will go through stages. I think we're at the beginning of a recovery stage that has to deal with two basic matters. One is the removal of the rubble in the streets. 6 months after, there's a lot of debris still in the streets in Haiti, which has a potential to create some health problems in Haiti. Secondly, there is a need to build homes. There are over 1 million people unsheltered in Haiti today. So these two things must be prioritized. And then later on, continue with some other things. In the Dominican Republic, we made a commitment that we are going to implement at the end of this month, which will be the construction of a university. This is our commitment, and we hope that on the 12th of January of 2012, exactly 2 years after the earthquake, at the same time the quake took place, we'll be inaugurating this university. The idea is, out of tragedy, there is hope, and there is this brotherhood between Dominican Republic and Haiti. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the student body, it is my very great pleasure to thank President Fernandez for paying a visit to my university and for giving such timely and informative lecture. I am the proud daughter of Dominican immigrants who arrived in New York in 1984, speaking not a word of English. My parents met in an ESL class, got married in 1987, and became American citizens several years later. They have worked endless hours to get me to where I am today, and I couldn't be prouder. But even though I was born and raised in New York, my home and my heart are in the Dominican Republic. I grew up not only hearing the Spanish language, but also dancing to the rhythm of merengue and indulging in rice and beans and plantains. I even celebrated Dominican Independence Day and would proudly attend school wearing the Dominican flag. Most importantly, all of my extended family is still in the Dominican Republic. And I'm going there this August to visit my grandfather. I will, of course, tell him of the great honor that I received from GW when I was selected to introduce and meet the president of the country of my ancestors, and how thrilled I am to be a part of this event. I can only imagine my grandfather's joyous response. He will give me a big smile, he'll have a big smile on his face and give me a big kiss and hug. President Fernandez's visit highlights the importance of educating students on a global level. My own studies at the Elliott School of International Affairs have concentrating on Latin America and international development. I studied in Costa Rica and Chile last fall, and during this time, I was able to experience exciting presidential elections. So far, I've had the good fortune to experience elections left and right. First Obama's election in 2008, and then Sebastián Piñera's election in Chile. So for this reason, my parents think I'm gonna run for office. But I think I'd rather go the Hillary Clinton way and become Secretary of State. Once again, President Fernandez, I want to thank you for everything you've done for my parents' native lands and for joining us here on this wonderful day. Que viva Quisqueya.